Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis and we'll be learning today Mirza Hashem Daf Mem Zayin Amud Aleph, but we pick up today first on Mem Vav Amud Beis where we have some unfinished business. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Netilas Yadayim and we pick up today Mem Vav Amud Beis, second line down in middle of the line, Siman Kuf Nun Ches Sif Daled. Now, I don't want to go too much into this in a recap, because we've repeated this already many times, but just for the sake of context, we have to remember what we have seen so far. We have seen so far that there's a takanas chazal of Netilas Yadayim al hapas. One of the reasons that we saw for the gzera of Netilas Yadayim al hapas is mishum srach truma. Again, very briefly, what's the takana of srach truma? Srach truma we are translating as in order to create a proper routine for the treatment of truma. The gzeira of srach truma was as follows. We don't want a kohen to handle truma, or anybody else for that matter. We don't want anyone to handle truma with dirty hands. Simply put, we don't want to cause hefsid truma. Truma is kaidish. We don't want truma to become ruined. Therefore, what we want is that people should be nizhar to wash their hands before handling truma. How do we make that happen? So, especially since we're dealing largely with kaihanim, the simplest way to ensure that that would happen is to use Hilchos Netilas. If we turn around and we say that if you touch the truma with unwashed hands, you're going to make the truma tameh, then Kayanim are going to be very, very careful not to handle truma with unwashed hands. So in order to accomplish that, the Chazal turned around and they made a new gzeira. They made a Tuma D'Rabbanan. They said that unwashed hands are shniyos l'tuma. Unwashed hands are considered to have second-degree tuma. Now, if unwashed hands have second-degree tuma, then when they touch truma, they transmit the tuma to the truma, and the truma becomes puzzle. By truma, you can have third-degree tuma. By chulin, you cannot. Tuma stops by chulin by a second degree. But by truma, you can have third-degree tuma. So again, Chazal said, stam yadayim, unwashed hands, they are shniyos l'tuma. They are second-degree tuma. Oh, if you're going to touch truma now with unwashed hands, you're going to make that truma a shlishi. That truma is now going to be considered tameh, and you've gone ahead and you've ruined the truma. Now, kohanim are going to be very careful not to touch truma with unwashed hands, and we have now protected the truma. Now, Chazal took it a step further, and they said, in order to make sure that kohanim are going to really be used to washing their hands, we're going to make a takana on Gans Klal Yisrael. We're going to say that Gans Klal Yisrael, Leviim, Yisraelim, kohanim, doesn't matter who. Gans Klal Yisrael, if they're kivei suda on a meal that has bread, then they have to wash their hands before eating bread. Why did they pick on bread? They picked on bread because they said most truma comes from grain products. Most grain is eaten in the form of bread. So we're going to make a new takana on Gans Klal Yisrael. You want to be kaveh suda al hapas, you have to wash your hands before eating bread. Now, a kohen for sure is going to make sure everybody washes their hands before eating bread. So now we've accomplished our goal. We've protected truma. Everybody's going to wash their hands before eating bread, and we no longer have to worry that truma is going to be handled with unwashed hands. That's the gzeira, the takana of the Netilas Yadayim al hapas. We saw another reason, and that was kedusha nekius, that it's pashut. There's an Indian of kedusha, that a person is supposed to have clean hands when he goes to sit down to a meal. They made it on bread. That's kviyas suda. That's really sitting down and eating a meal. It's different than eating a bag of potato chips. So we want that you should have clean hands when you sit down to have a meal. That's what we saw so far. Now in Sif Daled, we're going to branch out to a new halacha that many of you will remember from the Pesach Seder. We know by the Pesach Seder we eat karpas. What do we do by karpas? We take a vegetable and we dunk it in salt water. Now we know kadesh orchatz karpas. Before karpas comes orchatz. What's orchatz? Orchatz is we wash our hands without a bracha. Why are we washing our hands? Oh, the reason we wash our hands is because we're eating a vegetable dunked in a liquid. Comes along. We have a Gemara in Pesachim. Kol shetibuloi b'mashke. Anything that you eat when you dunk it into a liquid needs Netilas Yadayim. That's the halacha that we're going to discuss here in Sif Daled. Says the Mechaber here, Sif Daled, Mem Vav Amud Beis, second line down the middle of the line. Im oichel davar shetibuloi be'echad mishiva mashkin. If you eat something that you dunk into one of 7 liquids, which 7 liquids? The liquids shesimanam, that we have a mnemonic. We have a siman for these 7 liquids. The mnemonic is yad shachat dam. Yad, a hand, shachat, slaughters, dam, blood. So yud, dalid, shin, ches, tes, dalid, mem. That's a mnemonic for the 7 liquids. Now the Ramah tells us what the 7 liquids are. Dahainu, yayin. The yud is yayin, so wine. The dalid, yad, the dalid is dvash. And over here, when we talk about dvash, we mean what we really call honey. Dvash devorim, the honey of bees. We know that in the pasuk when it says dvash by the Shiva Minim, Eretz Chita Usa'ira, Eretz Ze Shemen Dvash. Dvash over there means dvash tamarim. It means date honey. It means the sweet liquid, the sweet juices that come out of the dates. Over here, we're not talking about date honey or any other fruit honey. Over here, we're talking about bee honey. So far we have yayin, dvash, wine, and bee honey. Then shachat, shin is shemen, oil, and we mean specifically shemen zayis, olive oil. Then yad shachat, so yud daled shin. Next we have ches, chalav, milk. Then we have tes is tal, dew. Then we have dalid is dam, is blood. And then lastly is the mem, mayim. So, says the Mechaber, anything that you eat when it's dunked in one of these 7 liquids. And again, the 7 liquids are wine, bee honey, olive oil, milk, dew, blood. Now you're thinking right away, you eat something that's dunked in blood? We'll get to that. Mayim or water. Continues the Mechaber on the top of Mem Zayin Amud Aleph. V'loy nisnagev. And the item that you dunked into one of these 7 beverages is not dried off, so it's still wet from dunking it into one of these beverages. Va'afilu ein yodav noigos b'mkayim hamashke. And even if your hands are not going to come into contact with the part of the food that became wet. So you're taking an Oreo cookie and you're dunking it in milk. But you only dunked part of it in milk. And you're not actually going to touch the part that became wet. Or you take a cucumber and you're dunking a cucumber or a tomato slice into olive oil, but you're not going to touch the part that's wet. You're only touching the dry part. Still in all, says the Mechaber, tzarich netila b'loy bracha. So you take a food. So you take a fruit, or you take a vegetable, or you take something else, some other kind of food. The Mishnah Berurah is going to say basar. You take a piece of meat, and you dunk it into one of these 7 beverages, and you want to eat it, you need Netilas Yadayim first, but without a bracha. And that's why by the Pesach Seder, you're going to take your karpas, so you're going to take your potato, or your celery, or your radish, or whatever your minig is for karpas, and you're going to dunk it in salt water. That's mayim. That's one of the 7 beverages. You have to wash before you eat it. That's this halacha of Sif Daled. Now, we're going to have to see what exactly is this based on. So let's take a look right away at a very deceptive Mishnah Berurah over here. And I'm going to give it to you from kind of 30,000 feet. This is very complex. There's several different machlekes rishonim involved over here. But let's see what the Mishnah Berurah says. Back on Ben Vava Mid Beis, Mishnah Berurah is cutting Yud Aleph. So the Machaber said, Im oichel davar, if you eat something, shetibuloi b'mashke, that you dip into one of these 7 beverages. But the Machaber does not define what kind of davar. What is it that you're eating? Does it matter precisely what it is? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Hainu afilu yerek, even a vegetable, uperos, or fruits, ubasar, or meat. Any kind of item that you're dunking in one of these 7 beverages, you have to wash before you eat it. Now, let's pause for a second. Until this point in Siman Kuf Nun Ches, the only halacha that we know of washing is to wash over bread. And we specifically said that the reason the Chazal picked on bread is because most truma is made from grain products, and most grain products are eaten in the form of bread. And therefore, because of Srach Truma, we made this Takanas Chazal of Netilas Yadayim al Hapas. Now we have a new Netilas Yadayim. Now we have a Netilas Yadayim on something that's dunked into one of the 7 beverages. Is this related to the takana of Netilas Yadayim al Hapas? Is this a whole different halacha of Netilas Yadayim? What exactly is this? So the Mishnah Berurah says like this. V'af al gav da al peiros loy tiknu Netilas Yadayim. We don't find that there's any takana of Netilas Yadayim when you eat peiros, when you eat fruits. We don't find a Netilas Yadayim when you eat vegetables. We said there's only Netilas Yadayim al Hapas. So what is this Netilas Yadayim? Says the Mishnah Berurah, over here we're dealing with a different animal. Now let me give you a heads up before we read it inside in the Mishnah Berurah. We explained that when it comes to the Netilas Yadayim al Hapas, we're doing this misham srach truma. And we explained, stam yadayim are shneim, stam yadayim are 2nd degree tuma. You touch truma, truma is capable of becoming tameh in the 3rd degree. So we made stam yadayim 2nd degree tameh. Now you know you can't touch truma, you got to wash your hands first. Oh. There's another very interesting din d'Rabbanan in Hilchos Tumah. And that is, even though the way Tumah usually works is that an Av HaTumah, a source of Tumah, makes a Rishon. If an Av HaTumah comes into contact with something, it makes that thing a Rishon l'Tumah, 1st degree Tumah. And then if a Rishon comes into contact with something else, it makes it a Sheni, a 2nd degree Tumah. And then if the 2nd degree Tumah, like Stam Yadayim, comes into contact with Truma, it's capable of making it 3rd degree Tumah. So it always goes down a step. You go from an Ava Tumah to a Rishon l'Tumah to a Sheni l'Tumah to a Shlishi l'Tumah. That's usually the way it works. But there's one great exception. And that exception is that if a Sheni l'Tumah comes into contact with one of the 7 beverages that we just mentioned, if a Sheni l'Tumah comes into contact with wine, with honey, with olive oil, or the other 4 beverages of the 7 beverages, that beverage becomes a Rishon. You hear that? If a Sheni l'Tumah comes into contact with one of these 7 beverages, those beverages don't become a Shlishi. No, they actually become elevated to a Rishon. Now, this is a Mishnah and a Gemara in Shabbos. We're not going to go into this now because we're not really learning Hilchos Tumah HaTorah, so I'm not going to go into the reason of why Chazal did that, but that's the Takanas Chazal. That's the Din d'Rabbanan. Anything that's capable of passeling Truma, so that means anything that could turn Truma into a Shlishi, a.k.a. a Sheni, makes one of these 7 beverages a Rishon. Now, Stam Yadayim are Shneim. Stam Yadayim have 2nd degree Tumah. So now let's analyze this. Let's say you take a cucumber and you dunk it into one of the 7 beverages. And let's say you have Stam Yadayim. So you went ahead, you took Stam Yadayim, which are Sheni, You took a cucumber and you dunked it into olive oil. Oh, you know what's going to happen now? Your hands that are shneim, your hands that are sheni, are going to make the olive oil a rishon, and now the olive oil is actually going to be metame the cucumber and make the cucumber a sheni. Now even chulin could become a sheni. So now, let's remember, buy bread. We went ahead and we made a way out takana on Gans Klal Yisrael. We said that we're going to make Gans Klal Yisrael wash when they eat bread. Now, Gans Klal Yisrael that's eating chulin, what exactly is the problem over here? Even if Gans Klal Yisrael, a Yisrael on the street, his hand, stam yadayim, they're shneim. So they're going to go ahead and they're going to touch bread. The bread is chulin. Chulin is incapable of becoming a shlishi. There's no such thing as a shlishi by chulin. Chulin is not capable of receiving third-degree tumah. So why are we making Yisrael who eats a tuna fish sandwich, why are we making him wash over his tuna fish sandwich? The answer is, mishum srach truma, because we want the kohen to be careful when he eats his tuna fish sandwich, and the bread of his tuna fish sandwich is truma. And truma could become a shlishi. So in order so that the kohen should be careful with his truma that's capable of becoming a shlishi, we made you, Yisrael, wash your hands when we're eating chulin, even though your chulin can't become a shlishi. So there's nothing wrong with you handling your chulin bread with stam yadayim. That's what we saw till now. But now we're dealing with a whole different animal. Now, if you take an apple and you dip it in honey, right? In Yonah D'Yoma, we're holding in the middle of Elul, we dip the apple in the honey. So if you're going to dip an apple into honey, you, Yisrael, your stam yadayim ashniim, you can't make the apple tameh because the apple of chulin is not capable of becoming a shlishi. But if you dunk it into honey, now your stam yadayim that ashniim are going to make the honey a rishon. And now the honey that's a rishon could make the apple a sheni. So because of this has nothing to do with the Takanas Chazal of washing on bread. That, and I'm telling you the way Tosfos and Psachim learns. There are other Rishonim that disagree, but the way Tosfos and Psachim learns is this takana over here of washing on a davar shetibuloi b'mashke is not really related to the Netilas Yadayim ala pas. Netilas Yadayim ala pas is mishum srach truma. We want you to wash because we want the kohen to have good habits. This Netilas Yadayim of davar shetibuloi b'mashke is because you yourself, we don't want you to go ahead, dip your apple in honey, and your hands are going to make the honey a rishon. The honey that's a rishon is going to make the apple a sheni, and now you're going to eat an apple that's tameh. And we don't want you to do that. Now, there's no Isser Daraisa on a Yid eating a tameh apple. There's no Isser Daraisa anywhere that says that a Yid's not allowed to eat something that's tameh. You're not allowed to eat kachim that's tameh. You're not allowed to eat truma that's tameh. But you're allowed to eat chulin that's tameh. There's no Isser on eating chulin that's tameh. But there is a Maila D'Rabbanan not to eat chulin that's tameh. That even chulin that's tameh, you shouldn't eat. That's why you learn the Mishnah, you learn the Gemara. A chaver didn't eat something that was tameh. So Tosfos learns this din of davar shetibuloi b'mashke, that you have to wash your hands before you eat a davar shetibuloi b'mashke, is to make sure that you should not come to eat chulin that's tameh. Therefore, says Tosfos, not negaya nowadays. Not negaya nowadays. All of our food is tameh. So what are we worried about the apple that we dip in honey? All of our food is tameh. So lefi Tosfos, this halacha, not negaya nowadays. And we're going to see many achronim paskin that way. And if you look in the Aruch HaShulchan says you don't see that anybody's nizar in this. Now the Mishnah Berurah is going to say that we should be nizar. And this is a Mishnah Berurah here. So I'm going to give you the hachra of the Chavetz Chaim. The hachra of the Chavetz Chaim is that you should be nizar. And if you look at the Dirshu footnotes, you'll see that a lot of the Paiskei Eretz Yisrael, they are nizar, and they were nizar in davar shetibuloi b'mashke. And it's very negeya, because if you take an apple, you want to eat an apple with the peel, and you go to the sink and you wash the apple, and now you want to bite into the apple, that's a davar shetibuloi b'mashke. You just took the apple and you got it wet with water. Water is one of the 7 beverages. So now you want to take a bite out of that apple, according to this halacha, you got to wash first. And it's negated to other things too. Many people have sliced up vegetables and they make a vinaigrette. They make an olive oil vinaigrette. If you make an olive oil vinaigrette, so that, yes, it has vinegar mixed in with it, it might have some lemon juice mixed in it and spices, but it's primarily olive oil. Olive oil is one of these zayin mashkim. So you take your pepper spears and your cucumber spears and you dip it into olive oil, davar shetibuloi b'mashke. And the halacha that we just said, even if you're touching the part that's dry, so you're holding it on the dry end and you're dipping it in and eating it, doesn't matter. You still have to go ahead and you still have to wash. The Ramah is going to say that straight out. So if you follow the Mishnah Berurah and you are nizar in this halacha, you got to wash in all of these cases. Okay. Now let's see it inside. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cutting Yod Aleph, Hainu. Afilu yarek uperi sabasar, even vegetables and fruits and meat. Va'af al gav da'al peiros loy tiknu netilas yadayim, even though we don't find that there's any takana of netilas yadayim on peiros, on fruits, or on vegetables, if they're dry. As a matter of fact, hopefully we'll still see today, sif hey, where we're going to say, the Mechaber is going to say, if somebody washes over a dry fruit, and I don't mean dried fruit like prunes. I mean a fruit that's physically dry, an apple that you take out of the fridge that's dry. Somebody who washes over a dry fruit, hareza migasei ruach, he's considered a bal gaiva. So there is no din of netilas yadayim on a dry fruit. So why do we have this halacha here that if you dunk a fruit or a vegetable or a cookie or a piece of meat into one of the zayin mashkim, you have to wash? Explains the Mishnah Berurah what I told you. Hasam haperes atzman loy nitmu me hayodayim. Over there, if you're talking about a fruit that's dry, that fruit, if it's chulin, is incapable of being makabel tumah from your hands, because your hands shehayodayim shniyos hein. Your hands only have 2nd degree tumah. Ve'ein sheni ois shlishi b'chulin, and a sheni like your hand is incapable of making a shlishi out of chulin, because chulin cannot accept 3rd degree tumah. Masha ein kein kishetibulon b'mashke. But if you take that fruit or vegetable or cookie or piece of meat and you dunk it in one of the zayin mashkim, uve mashke kaimelon denegia b'yadayim etami oisan lios tchila. And when it comes to one of the zayin mashkim, we paskin the takanas chazal that if you touch one of the zayin mashkim with your hands, then the mashke, the beverage, becomes a tchila. Tchila is another word for a rishon. It becomes a rishon. Well, now that rishon is going to turn the fruit of the vegetable into a sheni. So then, tiknu netilas yadayim, then there's a new takanas chazal that you have to wash your hands before you do this. Shalo yistamu amashkin al yodam, so that one of the zayin mashkim that you're dunking the fruit of the vegetable into should not become a sheni from your hands, and then it will transmit tumah to the food item and make it a sheni. And now you'll go ahead and you'll eat something that's tameh, which is sheni l'tumah, which Chazal didn't want you to eat. A Michael that's tameh, even if it's chulin. Now, that's Taisus. There is another sheet in the Rishonim that say that this takana is also Mishum Srach Truma. How is this takana Mishum Srach Truma? This takana is Mishum Srach Truma because essentially what we're doing is we're telling Gantz Klal Yisrael, oh, if you eat an apple dipped in honey, so then theoretically your hands that are shniyim could make the honey a rishon, and then the honey that's a rishon could make the apple a sheni, and then you're eating something that's tameh. We don't want that you should be in the habit of eating something that your hands made tameh, because we want to make sure that kaihanim never take the risk of handling truma with their hands and making the truma tameh and eating it when it's tameh. So those Rishonim hold that this is also Mishum Srach Truma. Now there's a major difference. According to Taisvis, this halacha is really not negeya nowadays. According to this other shita, it is negeya. The same way we wash over bread, mishum srach truma, this is also mishum srach truma, so it's negeya nowadays too. It's mishum srach truma. Also, according to these rishonim, you would wash with a bracha. The same way you make a bracha on Netilas Yadayim when you do Netilas Yadayim ala pas because of srach truma. So this Netilas Yadayim on davar shetibuli b'mashkin is also mishum srach truma. It would also require a bracha of Netilas Yadayim. So there's a major nafkamina over here in this machlokes rishonim. However, let's first go to Ois Cut Yud Beis. Says the Mishnah Berurah, we're talking about a davar shetibuloi. Now, those words mean something that you're toivel, something that you dunk in one of the Zayin Mashkin. Says the Mishnah Berurah, those who soak fruits or vegetables in water, in order to clean them. That is also called davar shetibuloi b'mashke. You're not taking it and dunking it in water in order to eat it. You're going and you're soaking it in water in order to clean it. But that's also called davar shetibuloi b'mashke. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, the davar she'ein darkoi l'toivloi, something that it is not considered normal to go eat it by dunking it in a mashke. I'm trying to think in my mind of a quick example. It's not coming to me. But if there's a food that it is not normal to go dunk popcorn, you know, French fries, you dip it, you dunk in ketchup. Now, ketchup's not one of the Zayin Mashkin, but theoretically, right, a French fry is a piece of a vegetable. I don't know, maybe there are some people who would dunk it in some kind of an olive oil that's spiced with garlic and basil or something else. Nobody's taking popcorn and dipping it in olive oil. At least I don't think so. V'davar she'ein darkei l'toivloi, something, a food item that it's not normal to dunk, oy li'ois alav mashke, or it's not normal to eat it when it's wet, ein tzarich netilas yadayim, then you don't need netilas yadayim, de milsa de loy shchichehi, because that's not normal. V'loy gazu b'rabbanan, we know the golden rule that Chazal didn't make their gzeirus on something that's not shchiach. HaTorah etzboi b'mashke, if somebody dips his finger into a beverage, umoitzetz, and then he sucks the beverage off of his finger, ein tzarich netila. For that, you don't need netilas yadayim. Delay tiknu netilas yadayim l'shtias mashkin, because over there, what you're really doing is you're drinking the beverage. You're not you're not dunking a food and eating the food. Over there, we're worried that you're going to transmit tumah from your hand to the mashke, from the mashke to the food. You dip your finger into water and then suck the water or the wine off your finger, you're drinking. There's no netilas yadayim on drinking. Ukidlakamei b'sivav. Ice cut Yud Gimel, this is the Gea be'echad mishiva mashkin, by one of the 7 beverages that we named. Aval shar minei mashkin anischatin min ha'peiros, but other types of beverages and juices that are squeezed out of fruits, like apple juice or orange juice, einam chashuvin mashkin. They are not considered one of the 7 beverages. Now, why is that a chiddush? Which one of the 7 beverages would you think orange juice is? Orange juice is not blood. Orange juice is not wine. Orange juice is not olive oil. Orange juice is not honey. But you might think that orange juice has a din of mayim. Maybe that's the water, so to speak, of the fruit. Probably if you analyze it, I'm sure, if you analyze it scientifically, you'll find out that a very high percentage of the orange juice is in fact water. But that's not the case. That's Halacha, that's not the case. Orange juice is considered zeya ba'alma. It's the sweat. It's what oozes out of the orange. It's not considered a mayim. So orange juice is not considered one of the 7 beverages. Ice cut yodal, dvash, honey, devoirim. That means bee honey. V'loy shel tamarim, not date honey. Oy shel min acher, or the honey, the sweet juices that come out of any other kind of fruit. By the way, what is, I guess, the unique property of these 7 mashkin? These 7 beverages are the 7 beverages that are both capable of becoming tameh. Olive oil could become tameh, wine could become tameh, water could become tameh, etc., etc. Also, these 7 beverages are machshir l'tumah. Food items cannot accept tumah unless they first became wet. So an apple can't become tamei if it was always dry. But if an apple was washed with water, now it's huksher lekabel tuma. If you poured olive oil over a cucumber that was dry before, when it was dry, it could become tamei. Now that it became wet with olive oil, it could be makabel tuma. So these 7 beverages are able to themselves be makabel tuma. They're also able to be machshir, to prepare other food items to accept tuma. And that's why this din exists only by these 7 beverages. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Kasra Paiskim, the Paiskim write, Kol hamashkin shenikrishu, any one of these beverages that became congealed, they became solidified, bein al yedei bishul, whether that happened through cooking. Sometimes you could cook a beverage and that solidifies it, that hardens it. Bein al yedei tzina, or you froze it. So you made olive oil ice cubes, or you made wine ice cubes. What do they call those? The Bartanura frisch something, I don't know. So you made wine ice pops. Ad she'ein ben teifeach al manas lahatfiach. If these items, these beverages became congealed and solidified to the extent where if you touch them, you don't get enough moisture on your finger to be able to transfer that moisture to another item. So that's how dry it is. Loi chashivi mashke. Then the congealed liquid is no longer considered a liquid. So if you take wine and you put it in an ice cube tray and you put it in your freezer and you taka freeze it, takes a lot to freeze wine because of the alcohol content, but if you taka make wine ice cubes and now you take it out of the freezer and you touch the ice cube and you don't get enough moisture on your finger that you could go to something else and touch it and that item will be wet, then that wine ice cube is no longer considered a mashke. And now, if you take your cucumber slice or your Oreo cookie and you put it onto the ice cube, that's not called davar shetibule b'mashke that you should have to wash. The das ha-toisvis, now it's Toisvis' opinion, very interesting, sha'afilu chazru v'nimuchay achakach. Even if you take the wine ice cube now and you melt it, it still doesn't have a din of a mashke. So you froze the wine, you melted the wine no longer has a din of a mashke, it lost its status as a mashke. Zula, oh, I'm sorry, I misspoke. Zulas yayin omayim, with the exception of water or wine. So take back what I said, let's change the case. You took olive oil, and you made olive oil ice cubes, and now you melted the olive oil ice cube, that olive oil no longer has the status of a mashke. But wine, if you melt it, it does retain the status of a mashke. Wine and water. This is the Shitas HaToisvis. V'hu adin, so too chalav, milk, shenikva, that curdled, and it became dry. Kishechazru v'nimuchai, if it turns back into a liquid, chashiv mashke. That also retains the status of a mashke. Ulafize, according to this, says the Mishnah Berurah, merkachas, a confection, like a candy, hametugun bidvash, that's fried in oil. I think the classic case of this, I don't know if they still make them. I haven't seen them in years. They used to take sesame seeds and cook them or fry them in honey and then make a candy out of it. Ulafize, merkachas, a confection, hametugun bidvash, that's fried in oil. Im hadvash alein korush, if that honey is now solidified, ad she'ein ben teifeach hamanas latviach, to the extent that you can't touch it and transfer moisture to a different surface, l'kulei alma mutaloichlam b'loy netila. You don't have to wash before you eat that confection, because this is not a davar shetibulei b'mashke. That honey is no longer considered a mashke. It's not considered a meichel. V'im advash einoi korush. Now, let's say you made a merkachas, you made a candy, and it's not that dry. It is teifeach hamanas latviach. It has moisture in it. Still, das hataz, it's the opinion of the Taz, the choshev mashke. Then the Taz says, well, then it's a mashke. If the honey is still wet, it's still moist, so then this is a davar shetibulim mashke, you have to wash. V'das Magen Avram, the loy choshev mashke. But the Magen Avram says, no, it's not a mashke. Why? Because this is a merkachas. This is a candy that you're going to eat. So it's made for achila v'loy lamashke. It's not made for drinking. Shem oichel alav. So now it is considered a meichel. So again, dvash, honey, is one of the 7 beverages. So you make a candy out of honey. You have sesame seeds and honey. L'chayra, you would think it's a davar shetibulei b'mashke, and if you nizer in this halacha, you have to wash. So we have over here, well, it depends. Tosfos says if it's karush, if it's dry, and it's dry enough that you can't transfer moisture from it to another surface, then it's no longer a mashke. If it's wet, well, then the Taz says if it's wet, well, then it's a mashke. Says the Magen Avram, no. Since this is oimid la'achila, since this is something that's made for eating, it loses the status of a mashke. How will we machriya between these different shitas? Says the Mishnah Berurah, v'achai adam machriya, the chai adam is machriya, the yesh chilik bazeh, here's how you make the difference. De'im kana hadvash va'adayin hu me'urev b'shava. If you're the candy maker, and you bought this honey while it's still in the wax, so what do they call it? Beeswax. You went, the honeycomb. You went and you bought honeycombs with the honey still in it. So you bought mamish unprocessed honey. They took the honeycomb out of the hive and you got the honey while it's still in the comb. V'hitichai, and you melted the honey al menas kain, for this purpose, kedei l'tagen boy, in order to fry candies, to fry confections in this oil. Im kain, if so, says the Chai Adam, may oilam loy haya alav shei mashke. This honey was never processed in order to be a beverage. This honey was processed in order to be a meichel. So then, since it never had a din of a mashke, since you melted it down to make a meichel out of it, so then the Chai Adam says, Ve'ein tzarich netilas yadayim. Then you don't need netila. But if somebody went to a mead maker, M-E-A-D, somebody went to somebody who makes honey mead, which is like a beer-like beverage, somebody went to somebody who makes honey mead, and he bought already processed honey from the honey mead producer, well, the honey mead producer, he took the honeycombs, he processed the honey in order to make a beverage out of it. Now, you bought it from him, and you want to use it to make your candies. So you're making a meichel out of it. But when the honey was first processed, it was processed in order to be a beverage. Then, says the Chai Adam, you know that the mead maker processed the honey in order to make a beverage. Then tzarich netilas yadayim. Then you need netilas yadayim. Afal gav shebetagin b'yoichel, even though you're using it to make a meichel. Vayim b'derech hachayim shekasav. Take a look at the Derech Chaim who writes, Dem oichel amekachas ayidei mazleg. The Derech Chaim has a new chap. If you eat this confection with a fork, so now there's another reason to be mekel, because remember, the whole issue over here is a davar shetibulei b'mashke. You're going to handle it with your hands. Your hands are a sheni. Your hands are going to make the dvash a rishon. The dvash that's a rishon is going to make the candy a sheni. And you're going to end up eating something that's tameh. But if this is something that you eat with a fork, so then you're not going to handle it with your hands. So the Derech Chaim says, then you can be makel that you don't need the tila. This whole discussion is only germane to a confection that's fried in dvash, because dvash is one of the zayin mine mashkin. It's one of the 7 species of beverages that are mekabel tumah and are makshar mekabel tumah. Aval abetugin betzukar, but candies that are fried in sugar cane, ain't sark netila lekuli alma delay have a mashke. That's already not a mashke, so this whole discussion doesn't even begin. Wow. Ice cotton tesvav, we're still on mem vav and beis. Ice cotton tesvav, says the Mishnah Berurah, shemen. One of the zayin mashkin is oil, says the Mishnah Berurah, hainu shemen zayis. We're talking about specifically olive oil. Umashba deshar shmanim eina b'klal mashke, but other oils, canola oil, vegetable oil, soybean oil, those other oils are not considered one of the zayin mashkin. We're talking specifically about shemen zayis. Ice cotton tezayin chalav, milk. V'huadin mei chalav, also the water of milk, what we call in English whey. which is a byproduct of milk. That's when you curdle the milk. You take out the cream, you curdle the milk like as if you're making cheese, and you go ahead and you strain it. So that water that's left over has no milk fat in it. That's a milk byproduct called mei chalav. That's also one of the zayin mashkid. It's still chalav. Oichema, or butter, kishenimucha, when the butter is melted. V'lachein, therefore, ha'tovel behem davar meichel, somebody dunks a food into mei chalav or into melted butter, tzarich lital yadav, he has to wash his hands. Now, melted butter goes back to the conversation that we just had in Ice Cut and Yodalid. You're talking about a beverage that was karush, it was solidified, and then melted down. So now, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'imahaya hachema krusha, if we're talking about congealed butter, ain't tzarich lital yadav, if you take something and you spread butter onto it, not talking about bread, if you would put butter on a vegetable, butter on a fruit, you wouldn't have to go ahead and wash, because that's not a mashke. The chema krusha have a ka'oichel, because congealed butter is a meichel, not a mashke. V'ha'oichel davar ametugin b'chema. How about if you take something and you fry it in butter, which people certainly do. V'ha'oichel davar ametugin b'chema, kishi, let's say fish. A lot of people fry fish in melted butter. So says the Mishnah Berurah, v'ha'oichel davar ametugin b'chema kishi lecha al gaboy tzarich lital yadav. If the butter is wet when it's on the fruit, you have, or on the food item, you have to wash. Ubechayadam kasav, the Chayadim says, the dafka kishinimuach hachema b'machvas b'shas hatigun kaidem sheiniach ha'oichel l'soichai v'nasa oleh shem ashke b'kaidem. The Chayadim says the only time we're going to have a problem with melted butter of davar shetibuloi b'mashke is if you took butter, you melted it in a pan, and now you put the food item into it when it was already melted into a mashke. But if you put the butter on the food when it was solid, and it only becomes liquid now, we paskin that a mashke that's coming to improve a food is considered a food. If you eat something that's fried in fat, let's say chicken fat, schmaltz, or in eggs, l'kulayamaloy have a mashke that everybody agrees is not considered a davar shetibula b'mashke. Ois cotton yod zayin, we said that one of the zayin mashkim is dam. Trying to get out of the sunlight.